Welcome, everybody. My name is Jody Rao. Use she, her pronouns. I'm a manager here at the Coalition on Homelessness, and this is Public Benefits Are Key. We're talking about TANF, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, and WorkFirst. And there are a lot of changes. So if you've been in this training before, there are definitely updates that have occurred, and Hannah is prepared as always to share with us the latest and greatest for these programs and everything you need to know. Slides are going to be available for everybody, and if you registered, you should have gotten a version of that when Tim sent out the reminder message, but we will be sharing those out after the fact with our blog, and the recording will be up on our YouTube channel quickly, and then followed by a blog with all the resources and everything else. So look for that email. Hannah is really awesome about having pauses in her presentations for questions after each section. So we should have time to get to everything. Go ahead and throw stuff in the chat if you don't want to be included in the recording. Just stay on mute and we'll get your question in through the chat. If you need closed captioning, you should be able to access that down on the bottom of your Zoom screen that says show captions. We love to see faces if you are so inclined to come on screen, but we understand that's not always what we want to do at 9 a.m. in the morning. So, but we do love to see where you're from, your name, your pronouns, all that good information. I'm loving that people are introducing themselves into the chat. Before I turn it over to Hannah, I just want to let folks know that we have secured a date for our annual McKinney-Vento training. This is the training that the coalition does on the federal law that provides some funds and resources for students experiencing homelessness, but also make sure that folks know what the rights that they have, because they have a lot of rights that help keep them engaged, thriving in their community and meeting their needs as they're navigating housing instability. So we are going to throw that training in to the link. Tim just put a bunch of details in it, but he put a bit.ly in because he's so good and I don't know how to do the bit.ly thing. So that's going to be August 1st, 9 a.m. We usually invite a lot of our community partners that either work in this space from the legal perspective, know this law inside and out, providers that have experience. So it's usually a very communal and community-based learning that we do for folks around this. So that registration is live and ready to go. Please share that far and wide. And on that note, I'm going to hand it over to Hannah so we can get going. Thanks for being here, Hannah.
Thanks so much for having me. Nice to see everyone today. I recognize some names, some participants, some repeat participants, and other community partners. So nice to see everyone today. Like Jody said, I'm Hannah Rosenberger. I'm the program manager for the Benefits Legal Assistance Program at Solid Ground. I am going to share my screen so I can show the PowerPoint presentation. It always takes me a second to remember how to do this. So share screen. And this is the screen. Put this into presentation mode. Okay. So I can't see anybody's faces or monitor the chat as I'm presenting. So as Jody did mention, I do, after each section that we're going to talk about today, I have a pause for questions. So again, feel free to come off mute at that point or put your questions in the chat, and my colleagues at the coalition will help read those questions off to me. All right, so today we are going to be talking about TANF and WorkFirst, TANF, which stands for Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. I'm Hannah Rosenberger. I'm the program manager at Benefits Legal Assistance, but I'm also one of the attorneys, and we are part of Solid Ground. So before we dive into the meat of the presentation, I just wanted to, name and acknowledge the fact that the public benefits these laws and policies and programs that I work within are steeped in, systemic racism, and there's a lot of harmful impacts that can happen when stereotypes or well, I should just read the slide in front of me. I'm trying to make it more conversational, but those aren't topics that we'll be able to necessarily dive in or talk about today. So I've just provided some additional reading, but I didn't want to just dive into the presentation without at least, acknowledging that even these benefits and systems that are meant to help people can also be systems of oppression, just like so many other systems that ourselves and our clients interact with every day. So these are the topics that we're going to talk about today. And again, after each section, I'll pause and we'll have a time for questions. There have been a lot of updates to TANF that are going to be coming that came out of our recent legislative session, some really great improvements to the TANF program. So I will be covering those as well. And I'm a benefits attorney, so I work with a lot of clients to help get on and maintain those TANF benefits. So I'll also be kind of giving tips and tricks and some advice about how to help your clients get these benefits, and then also how to maintain them as well. And then I keep saying before we get into the program, but I have one more detour. Because you're at this presentation, this training today, you have access to a kind of a technical assistance program that we're calling Ask a Lawyer. And what you can do is, if you have, a question about the application process, or maybe you're working with a client who needs an exemption from WorkFirst, or maybe your client is in or about to be in sanction status and they're not sure what to do, what you can do is you can email questions or a real life scenario to benefitslegalhelp@solid-ground.org. And if you put Ask a Lawyer in the subject line, one of our public benefits attorneys will respond, and will either respond by email or set up a phone call to talk with you and the client. And the idea is we want to be able to help before there is a legal issue. If we can help before issues come up, then clients can avoid having to even need to talk to a lawyer. So just a quick example of what this might look like is we recently had someone contact us through Ask a Lawyer who had a client that was on different public benefit programs, and they were starting to sell some homemade products that they had, and they weren't sure how that was going to impact their benefits. And so the case manager reached out to us. We ended up setting a consult call with the client and the case manager. We talked about things like income limits, reporting requirements. And so the client was in a better position to be able to move forward, rather than having to come to us later with a termination or an overpayment notice. So just a plug for the Ask a Lawyer program. Okay, so now, as I promised, we'll actually talk about what we're all here today, which is TANF, which stands for Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. So what TANF is, for folks that aren't familiar, it is a state cash assistance program that's available to low-income families in Washington state. It's actually a federal program, but we'll just be talking about it here in Washington state. So the eligibility for TANF, it's based on income, family size, how many resources a family might have, and there are some citizenship immigration status requirements. The benefits are available for 60 months in a participant's lifetime. So that's a 5-year lifetime limit to receive these benefits. There are some exceptions to this time limit, which we will absolutely talk about today. There is a requirement to participate in WorkFirst, which is a path to employment program. We will also talk about that today. Individuals on TANF must follow an individual responsibility plan, or an IRP. And yes, we'll talk about that more in detail later in the presentation. And pregnant or parenting teens may also be eligible to receive TANF if they are in an approved living situation. So these are the payment standards for 2023. You can see how much, if you're a family size of 1 up to 10, what that monthly benefit is going to be. And if you're not sure if you or your client is eligible, you can check out washingtonconnections.org. That's DSHS's website. And there's this tab that says, see if I qualify. It's like a little quiz. You enter information about family size and income, and then there'll be a list of programs that you might be eligible for. So I mentioned changes to TANF, and one of the changes is that as of January 1st, 2024, there is going to be an 8% increase in the TANF amount, that's a good news. So what that means is right now a family of one or a unit of one is getting $417. So that's going to go up to $450. Family of two is going to go up to $570. Family of three is going to go up to $706 and so forth. So it's an 8% TANF grant as of January 1st, 2024. So I mentioned there are income and resource requirements and limits for TANF. This slide I know it's a little wordy. We are sending a copy of the slide, so you'll be able to read it again at another time. So for income, there are two different types of income, and the income rule, it's different depending on where the income is coming from. So there's something called earned income, which basically means if you're getting wages from employment. There's also a type of income called unearned income, which is basically everything else, everything other than employment. So that could be like unemployment benefits or social security benefits, or maybe veterans benefits, child support. That's considered unearned income. So if somebody does have income from a job, what they get to do is divide the amount that they make in half, so 50%, and then whatever is left is their countable income, and that is what they can compare to this chart to the right. It's my right, it might be your left, earned income limit. So we call it a 50% earned income disregard. So if somebody is, for example, making $1,000 from income, their countable income is actually going to be 500, 50% of 1,000. And then you just compare that to the chart here, and if they're under the income limit, then they'll be able to be eligible. Now, unearned income is a little different, a lot different, I should say. It is counted dollar for dollar. So if somebody is getting $1,000 in veterans benefits, they're going to have $1,000 of countable income, and their income has to be less than the payment standard, which is this list here. There are also, and there are changes coming to the income, but I have a slide next that will talk about that. There are also resource limits. So a household unit, they have to have less than $6,000 in liquid resources. And what that means is things like cash or money in a checking or savings account, stocks, bonds, mutual funds. Those are liquid resources. There is also, the family's allowed to have a vehicle that's worth up to $10,000. And then there are some changes coming to that, which I'll jump to those changes now. So starting February 1st, 2024, that resource limit, which is now 6,000, is going to increase to 12,000, and DSHS will waive the value of one car. And what that means is there will no longer be that the car has to be worth less than $10,000. It's just if you have a car, regardless of the value, that's not going to count as your resource limit. And, you know, as I'm talking, I realized I skipped a few things in my introduction to this TANF program, so I'm going to rewind myself a little bit. TANF, I mentioned, it's a cash assistance for low-income families, and it's administered through DSHS, which stands for the Department of Social and Health Services. So you all may be familiar with that acronym, but I've said it a few times, and I realized I didn't give any context for that. So just wanted to clarify that. There are, as I mentioned, some other income changes to TANF coming in 2024. I'm going to talk a lot about different changes that are coming to TANF, and they all have different start dates. So I do have a helpful flyer, a link actually to a flyer that it's a one-pager. It has all the changes with all the different start dates, so it's a little easier to remember that way. So some changes coming to the income limits for TANF. This is starting August 1st, 2024. So that's not this August, but next August. There is also going to be a $500 earned income disregard in addition to that 50% earned income disregard that we already talked about. So ultimately, this means that TANF families will be able to keep more income to achieve that economic stability, hopefully sooner. And so what this actually looks like in practice is, if there's a family of 3, let's say, for example, and one parent earns $1,000 a month at a job. So right now, their countable income is going to be $500. They get that 50% earned income disregard. Starting August 1st, 2024, DSHS is going to disregard that first $500, and then their total income is going to be, that DSHS is looking at, is $500, and then they still get that 50% earned income disregard, which leaves actually only $250 of countable income. So as of 2024, the net income limit for a household of 3 is $706. That's the payment standard. So 250 is under the new, that's the new countable income that this family is going to have. So that gets subtracted from the grant, and this family is going to be able to get about $450. So basically what that means is families are going to be able to keep more of their income and still be able to get TANF benefits. So hopefully I explained that clearly, but happy to take questions on that as well. And then I'll send you all, you'll get that link for that one pager, which will also include this information. So there are other eligibility requirements for TANF that I quickly mentioned at the beginning. There are immigration requirements. You have to be lawfully present to receive TANF. There is a state version of TANF called State Family Assistance Program. So this is for families that are not eligible for TANF because of immigration status, but they are otherwise, would be eligible for this benefit. And families can receive a mixture of TANF and state family assistance. The rules are the same, the benefit our amounts are the same. You do have to be a Washington state resident and responsible for the care of children or a person who is pregnant. So this is for families with minor children. If you are, or if the client is caring for a relative's child, or maybe they're a legal guardian, or they're acting in the place of a parent, they may also be able to apply for TANF on behalf of the child. What I just explained, that's called a child-only grant. And so this is, again, if a person is caring for a child, they're acting like a parent, and then they can apply for TANF benefits on behalf of the child. Or this also applies if the parent is ineligible for TANF for a reason other than income. So this might be a situation where the parent maybe is their immigration status precludes them for receiving TANF, but their child can get it. They can apply for a child-only TANF. And there is a new change coming to this as well. There used to, I mentioned a 60-month lifetime limit for TANF. Well, a change, which I think is actually starting, sorry, I'm trying to look for the date. I think it's July 1st, 2023, but I can get the information, clarify that. But there won't be a time limit anymore for child-only TANF cases. So that's good news. There is another requirement to receive TANF, and that is cooperation with Division of Child Support. So what this means is if it's a single parent household and there's not already a child support order in place, then the parent who's receiving TANF is required to cooperate with Division of Child Support to set up that child support order from the non-custodial parent. But I just want to make sure folks know that there's a good cause exception to this requirement to cooperate with Division of Child Support. And that's if cooperating with DCS, trying to get this child support order in place, if that would result in serious physical or emotional harm to you, the parent, or the child in your care, you will get an exemption from having to work with DCS. It's called a good cause exemption. And the parent who's applying for TANF, they just have to tell their TANF caseworker that they're concerned about their safety or the child's safety. If you're working with a client and you're aware of the situation, you could write a letter. It doesn't necessarily have to come from a domestic violence advocate. The client's supposed to just be able to flag this, and then their case gets reviewed for this good cause exemption. And if for some reason a client has asked for this exemption and it was denied, or they weren't given this exemption, that would be a great case to reach out to us at Solid Ground Benefits Legal, or to email Ask a Lawyer about, because that's something we definitely want to be involved and help that client. So I've mentioned a few times, and I do think we have a question slide coming up, so there will be a pause soon. I mentioned a few times that there's this 5-year lifetime limit on receiving TANF. There are exemptions, which means the time limit won't apply. And there are extensions, which means you can get a few more months, 3 months, 6 months, 12 more months on TANF if you meet one of those extensions. So the exemption might be if you are an older caretaker. So you're over 55 and older and you are a caretaker for someone. If you are caring for an adult relative with disabilities, if you're caring for a special needs child, or if you being the person applying for TANF is an adult with severe or chronic disabilities. So you may be able to get this exemption. There are also these hardship extensions in place. So if somebody is already working 32 hours a week, but their income is still low enough that they qualify, they might get an extension. There's also an extension for survivors of family violence. So this would be if the client's maybe in a domestic violence situation, or maybe is fleeing or recently left and is still working on recovery from that. If there's an open child welfare case, or if the family, the individuals are homeless, there's an extension. So there was, or I should say, there still is a COVID-19 hardship extension in place, but it is ending on June 30th, 2023. So what this meant is during the pandemic, if somebody went over their 60 months, they were getting this extension because there was just this kind of general COVID-19 hardship extension. So there are probably going to be a lot of clients that are going to be impacted after June 30th, 2023, when this extension goes away. This is one of the changes that I wanted to make sure that we talked about and flag it for you all so that you might be able to help your clients prepare for this. So like I mentioned, this COVID-19 extension is ending June 30th, 2023. And again, just to clarify, an exemption means the limit doesn't apply to that individual. An extension means that the family is going to get some additional months as long as they still meet that extension. So DSHS is starting to screen TANF households for other time limit extensions, because it's possible that someone may be eligible for one of those other extensions that we talked about, but they've just been receiving the COVID-19 extension. And so now they have to see if they're eligible for another extension. So my kind of tip for this slide, and I've been starting to do it with my own clients, is you don't have to wait for DSHS to screen your client. If your client is over 60 months or maybe getting close to that, you can talk with your client about the other time limit extensions and start to gather documentation to support it, so that when the COVID-19 extension ends, the client's in a good position to be able to keep receiving TANF. So just an example is, if you're working with a client who maybe is fleeing a domestic violence situation, and they either have a protection order or they're in the process of getting one, or maybe they're working with a DV advocate, they can provide a copy of that protection order or that letter from the DV advocate and get screened for that family violence time limit extension to avoid being terminated from these benefits. And I'm happy to answer, more questions. It hasn't expired yet, so the COVID extension is still happening. So a lot of these changes, they're future changes, they're coming. So we may not know exactly what it's going to look like. We're just trying to anticipate and, figure out the best way we can support our clients. So some tips for the application process when you are working with a family that's applying for TANF. One tip I like to share is that if the family is homeless or unhoused, make sure that is clear on the application, especially if they're using an address. Maybe it's just a friend or family member's address on the application. And the reason why is because, as I alluded to, there are exemptions and exceptions for families that are unhoused. But if it's not clear that they're unhoused, they may not be screened for those exemptions. If possible, if you are able to provide proof of income with the application or shortly thereafter, if the family is working at all, because that is something that they may have to provide information. And their application could be delayed if they have to then gather that information. If a client maybe just lost their job or stopped working for another reason, you might also need what's called a stop work form. And I just included the DSHS form number there. And that's because if they just lost their income, it may not be clear that they're no longer working there. So they need something official from the employer showing that they are not going to get that income anymore. And then my other plug for advocates and case managers is that advocates can go with clients or be on the phone for these TANF and WorkFirst meetings. Of course, as long as the client gives permission. It's a really good opportunity to advocate for and with the client, with the person that's making decisions about their case. So as long as the client gives permission, you can be present for those meetings. And I will pause for questions, but I wanted to just click this link. This is the Statewide Poverty Action Network. I'll just scroll through this slowly. They put together this great one-pager with all the TANF updates and the timelines. So you can see everything that we've talked about and some other things we're going to talk about as well. It's all in one page, and it includes all the time limit. I mean, all the implementation deadlines as well, or starting dates, I should say. Okay, so that link is there. It will be included in the slide, and I could put it in the chat afterwards. And I will pause there to see if we have any questions so far.
Awesome. Yeah, I was just going to say, if either you or I know you sent us the slide, so if maybe Tim could go in and just pull that link and we can drop it in the chat so folks can have it now. We did have a couple questions. So, and then I had seen a hand earlier, and I don't know if that is still a question for that person. But first question is, will the SNAP work requirements be the same as the TANF WorkFirst requirements?
Okay, that's a great question. And just a little bit of context for folks that don't know, there were work requirements associated with SNAP, which is that's food assistance, sometimes also called basic food in Washington State. It's basically the money that goes on the EBT card. During the pandemic, those work requirements were suspended. And not everyone has a work requirement when you're on basic food. It's kind of a specific group of folks. And those are going to come back. Folks on the call probably remember. I think it's July. Well, I should say you get 3 months where you don't have to meet those work requirements, and then you have to start. So I think it's starting in July, but maybe it's by September. So just wanted to add some context to that question. Work requirements are different. The TANF work requirements are different than the food work requirements. So we'll talk shortly about WorkFirst and participating in WorkFirst and what that means and what the requirements are. And those are different than what work requirements you might have if you're like a single adult receiving basic food. So that's kind of a brief question, but hopefully gets to the answer.
Awesome. And I know it's a little bit down the road, but we are doing a food assistance training with Hannah on September 13th. So I've thrown that registration link into the chat as well. So the other, are these federally initiated changes or state initiated changes?
Yeah, these are state changes. They came from the state legislative session that just wrapped up, and they align with the federal sorry, the federal rules. So the state is allowed to make these changes, but this came from the state. So if you're in a different state, these may not be the same. You know, if you're in Oregon or Idaho, I'm not as familiar. But yeah, these came from the state legislature session.
Awesome. And then I'm going to hand the floor to Penny Marie, but then we have another question in the chat.
Hi. I'm sorry, I was late on the call as well. So I wanted to speak about when you were talking about when a family or person comes and talks to DSHS about the sorry, it was several questions ago, so I want to make sure I get it right. They have explained to their DSHS worker that by giving information to them could harm them or their children. I just wanted to speak from a personal space. My children and I experience homelessness because of domestic violence. And so from 2017 up fall to May 22nd of 2019, we experienced homelessness and found permanent housing, but we qualified for the exemption. And so the exemption, it's really important that you can, like when you're talking to your client, is my assumption, when you're talking to your client, that they really follow through with the, what my experience was, is that they partnered me with LifeWire. And so like every so many months, you have to like reconnect with your LifeWire worker so that you can continue your exemption, because from 2017 to July 15th of last year, my children and I, we exceeded like the 60 months, all of those things, we were able to survive off of TANF and off of food assistance. And also getting like the confidential address also is really important too. But I guess I'm saying this because it might seem hard, but it is actually doable. It's like the one place, in my opinion, from with TANF and DSHS, that they're actually very forgiving and gracious. And we would not have survived without those two entities. But the biggest thing was like that we had to keep checking in with our, whoever they partner you with, whoever your DV advocate is. And it actually was amazing because we were able to heal and transform. And now I work for Mercy Housing, and it's a really, really good thing. So I mean, I'm like, yay, they're still doing it, thank God. But it really, really can, like, it's life-changing. That one piece of like DSHS, because all of us know that they are not always as pleasant as they can be, but in this space they are, they really can help you. And it also opens up other doors and other not other doors, other opportunities for families. And you know, also doing like the confidential address program through the state of Washington as well. Your clients can use their confidential address, because I still use mine, to get all your DSHS paperwork. And you can tell DSHS, hey, I have the confidential address, because it goes into Olympia, and they will give you an extended time period. So like you were saying, like the if you have a different address, you just have to, like, it's so important just to let them know, just really like telling them. And you know, sometimes having somebody else advocate for you, you know. But I just wanted to share that. That's all. I'm just really glad that you shared that, because it's really important. And it, again, I know I'm saying it again, but it really was life-changing, because we were able to heal and come full circle. And now I'm on calls like this, giving back the things that I love and feel important.
Thank you so much for sharing. I think your personal experience and your insight, that's so valuable to have you on the call. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, Penny Marie, I'm going to second what Hannah said. That was really, really helpful. Thank you for sharing. It's, I think it's actually a really great example of why we do these and why we come together and why we want folks. I mean, this is a pretty straightforward, you know, didactic training where we monopolize the camera and mic time for the most part, but like this is a part of a bigger program that the coalition administers in conjunction with our partners at Reach and at Solid Ground. And part of that is making sure that we are uplifting the things that work really well and making sure that they stay and continue and improve them. And that we also hear about the things that are not working well so we can advocate for that. So really, really important perspective. Very happy to hear that you are healed and housed and, you know, here with us today in this capacity. Hannah, we have one more comment for this section in the chat, and question, I guess. It says, if a client is receiving child support as their only income, are they eligible for TANF? And will it still be based off the family unit size that was shown in the graph?
Yeah, great question. Child support is considered unearned income, but it doesn't preclude anyone from receiving TANF. As long as they're still income eligible, they can receive TANF. The thing to know about child support and TANF is that when you agree to receive TANF, the state will start taking some of the child support as a way to like, this isn't the technical way to say it, to like pay themselves back for paying for the TANF grant. And then you get a pass through. So you'll get your TANF benefits, and then you'll get some of the child support gets passed through to the parent. It's $50 for the first child, $100 if you have two, and then that's the most, that $100 is the most that gets passed through to the family. So you can still be receiving child support and eligible for TANF, but you may not be getting all of the child support passed through to you. So you can get, maybe you're going to end up getting a combination of TANF and child support. That's actually a good ask a lawyer question. You know, if you're trying to figure out, does it make does it make sense to, if this is how much you're getting in child support, how much are you actually going to get in TANF? Because even if you're only receiving like $50 a month in TANF, that is going to count as one of your 60 months. So that might be a slightly more strategic problem you have to work through. But just being on child support alone doesn't preclude anybody from being eligible for TANF. And in fact, if you are not receiving child support and there isn't a safety or fear concern, you actually would be required to cooperate to get that child support set up.
Great. And then another question came in, and then a comment. So I'm going to read the comment from Penny Marie. The pass-through comes on a different card that is through the US Bank, and it comes on the first of the month. So just another little tip and information. And then if the family identifies as unhoused as the reason for extension exemption, what sort of evidence for their homelessness or housing instability are needed?
Yeah. Okay. Another great question, kind of this question of verification and documentation. So it's supposed to be, sufficient for the family to just report and explain that they're unhoused. They're living in their car, or maybe they're living outside, or they're in a shelter. So, that's the first point of verification and documentation, is the client just reports that to their case manager or their DSHS caseworker. If they are in a shelter, for example, and can get a statement from the shelter just stating that they're there, they can also provide something like that. If they are staying with a friend, they're kind of couch surfing, or they're staying in an extra room, or the basement, DSHS might ask for the person's phone number that they're staying with to call and confirm, yes, they're staying here, or ask that other person to call. So it might look a little different depending on what the family situation is, but the family reporting that they're homeless, that should is supposed to be sufficient unless DSHS thinks, oh, maybe that doesn't, but you have this address, so what's this address? So they might have to explain why they're using this address, but that's not actually where they live. And again, I know I keep plugging this, but if a family's, they're not getting that exemption, or they're reporting that they're homeless, but they're not being approved for that extension, they're running into some kind of obstacle communicating that to DSHS, I would say reach out to us, because that might be where we need to get involved and help DSHS to accept, that this family, yes, is homeless and should be eligible for this exemption. It might also be, if the child is in school and the school's aware of the family's situation, something from the school can show that the child is unhoused. I'm sorry, I'm coming off of a cold, so just need a moment for water. Sorry about that, everyone. Hopefully that answered that question, but if not, let me know.
You're getting a thank you, Hannah, in the chat, so I think that suffices. And I'm not seeing anything else in the chat, so I'm going to have us move on. But before we do, I slyly dropped in the link to our feedback survey because my lovely colleague Tim reminded me that we like to get that information. So I'm going to call it out and put it in there again. But we really do appreciate when you all take the time to give us some feedback. This does really, we debrief with Hannah to make sure we're giving folks really good trainings, it's meeting your needs. And then, if other things come up, it's a way for us to then think through what other trainings can we offer around public benefits. And we do have a bunch more coming up. We have the whole rest of the calendar year. Whoa, that was really hard for my brain to connect on that one. We have the rest of the calendar year scheduled out and around for this. So we are in the process of making sure our website and our training and development page is updated, but we'll throw that link in there because you can just see we're going to do an ABD SSI joint training with Hannah and Benefits Legal Center, Benefits Law Center, about that transition from state ABD to federal SSI. We've got food benefits coming up. We're working on, and we're getting closer to actually accessing long-term care, not just if folks have had it and have been illegally discharged, but actually like what those rights are. So a lot coming down the pike, plus our shop talks where we really come together, not in a didactic space, where we really try not to be the ones hoarding the mic. So Hannah, I will hand it back to you.
Yes. And just a quick plug, Jody mentioned we're going to do a food kind of SAP training in a couple months. If anyone's heard of the term ABOD or adult dependent or a single adult without dependents, work requirements, if that sounds at all familiar or you're wondering what that is, we're going to talk about that at the training. So, but today we're here to talk about TANF, so I'll bring it back. I mentioned one of the requirements for receiving TANF is participation in WorkFirst. And WorkFirst is it's a path to employment program. It doesn't always mean employment. Sometimes it could be education or job training, but that's what WorkFirst is. So it requires TANF recipients to search for or maintain employment or engage in other community services. Most TANF recipients are required to participate in either employment, job search, education, or training for about 30 to 40 hours per week. But again, it can be individualized, so it could look different for everybody. Clients sign what is called an individual responsibility plan, which outlines these requirements. And I have some specific, tips and thoughts about how to have those IRPs be successful. At the moment, you are required to attend a WorkFirst orientation. There's a little asterisk because this is going to, the orientation's not going away, but it's not going to be mandatory anymore. So it won't be a reason that someone would be terminated because they didn't complete the orientation. So that change is coming down. I don't have a implementation date for that because it's still working its way through the rule change process. And WorkFirst families do receive a variety of support services to help them overcome whatever those barriers might be to get employment. So we talked about exemptions and extensions from that time limit, that 60-month time limit. And similarly, there are exemptions from participating in WorkFirst. So these are a few of the exemptions. If you have a baby under 1 year old, that's an infant exemption. If you are an older caretaker, so 55 years or older and taking care of someone else's child. If you have a severe and chronic disability, caring for a special needs child, or caring for a relative with a disability. So as of now, those are kind of the exemptions that are in place. But one of the also changes coming to TANF starting July 23rd, 2023, so that's just next month, there is this new good cause exemption for WorkFirst participation. And what this is it is supposed, or the goal behind this new good cause exemption is to give the TANF, the WorkFirst case managers, more flexibility in being able to approve someone for an exemption from WorkFirst if they don't meet these kind of tough other criteria to meet. So, just generally, if the family is going through a tough time, let's say maybe there's not a severe and chronic disability, but there's some kind of short-term medical issue for the parent or the child that's making it hard for the parent to be able to focus on a job search or go to work. They may be able to get this good cause exemption. Or just for an example, one of the exemptions now is if you are caring for a special needs child, but that means that you have to have proof from a medical professional or maybe from the school showing what the child's special needs are, why you have to stay home and care for them. It requires additional documentation. But let's say, and I should preface this by saying the good cause exemption, it hasn't started yet. So what I'm giving are just examples from what I've heard from DSHS that might qualify, or things that I would try to argue would fit under this good cause exemption. So let's say your child, is in school, but maybe is having issues at the school. So the parent is having to be very involved in the school, lots of school meetings, or maybe the child is being homeschooled and the parent needs to stay home and be able to supervise the child to help them be successful. Or, maybe they are not homeless, but kind of constant threat of eviction. Like there's a good reason why they're not able to participate in WorkFirst. So they're supposed to be screened for this additional good cause exemption. And again, the idea is that it's supposed to be flexible enough to exempt the family from good cause when they wouldn't be able to participate for a reason other than these very specific delineated reasons. So my call, or kind of my request for folks on the call, is this is a really good change to TANF. It's the idea is that it will help people be more successful on the program and be able to keep these benefits, but we don't actually know what it's going to look like. We don't know, is it going to matter which caseworker you're on the phone with? So if folks are helping clients to apply for this good cause exemption, if you are getting it for your clients, or if you aren't getting it, if it's not as easy as we think it should be to get these good cause exemptions, reach out to us and let us know. We do a lot of advocacy work with DSHS. So, if this isn't working, or if it's not being as flexible as it should be, let us know, elevate those issues. You could reach out to the coalition. I'll have my contact information. You can put it on the survey, because we want to make sure that this is actually working for families. And again, that starts July 23rd, 2023. All right, that was my little tangent about that good cause exemption. I've mentioned a few times this individual responsibility plan. The reason why I wanted to spend some time to talk about this is because it's a really important part of the WorkFirst participation. And if a client doesn't follow their IRP, they may end up being sanctioned or ultimately terminated from TANF. So it's really important that clients are actually able to follow the IRP. And this IRP, this individual responsibility plan, it is like a contract between the client and DSHS. And contracts should be agreed upon by both parties and negotiated. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is the client doesn't just have to accept what someone tells them should be on their IRP. If that isn't going to work for them, or they're not going to be able to be successful or to do that, the client is supposed to be a partner in creating that IRP. It also lists support services to help a client get a job. So it will list, if they're going to be enrolled in a resume writing class or an ESL class, and then that who's going to pay for that, which should be DSHS. So that will also be listed on the IRP. And I do have some examples of IRPs I'll show on the next slide. The IRP, it will say what the client must do to keep their TANF. So it will say if they need to look for work or maybe need to attend some job training before looking for work. If they're required to apply for, 3 jobs a month, that's going to be listed on the IRP. And then both the client and the WorkFirst case manager signs the IRP when it's written. And anytime it gets changed, it should be in the client's primary language. And clients or advocates should keep a signed copy, if they can, with their other important paperwork so that they have their own copy of this important documentation. Generally speaking, the first step of the IRP usually is the WorkFirst orientation and then doing a job search, which might look like a 12-week job search, but it can include time to complete other courses first. So maybe they're going to do an ESL class first, or a resume writing class first, and then do the job search. Just another tip, advocates can attend these WorkFirst meetings and can help clients advocate for a reasonable IRP that they can follow. So if the client knows, just with everything else that they have going on, they're not going to be able to apply for, 5 jobs in a month, but maybe 3 jobs is something more attainable. That's something that it might be helpful to have that advocate there to be able to help them, advocate for a more reasonable IRP. Part of the process to get that IRP is this comprehensive evaluation, which really, it looks like, it feels like it's just part of the conversation. So when somebody goes into DSHS or calls DSHS to apply for TANF, they're asked questions about their finances just to make sure they're eligible, and then they're going to talk to a TANF caseworker or WorkFirst worker, and they may not know specifically, okay, now we are entering the comprehensive evaluation part of the conversation. Sorry, I'm getting a phone call. It all happens on the same phone call usually, so it may just feel like the worker is asking them questions about what they're dealing with, their background work, their experiences, why they're not working, what they think might be helpful to help them get a job. But all of that is part of the comprehensive evaluation. And again, this is where the client should be part of the process building that IRP. So they should share what their barriers are and what they think they need to be able to participate in WorkFirst, so that that can be built in to the IRP, which is another reason why it might be helpful to have an advocate present if the client needs that additional advocacy. Let me see if I had other notes. One tip, I think I'm going to share this later on, but something that I do when I'm starting to work with a new client on TANF is we get a copy of their IRP and I go through it with the client. And if the client doesn't know why something's included in their IRP, or they don't remember being a part of it and it doesn't work for them anymore, I might help the client go back to DSHS and ask to things have changed, they need a new IRP and this is why, and then so that the client can be more involved in the creation of that IRP going forward. This is just an example, hopefully you all can see it, of what the IRP looks like. It's mostly boilerplate language, and then the specifics for the client are written in. So you could see the blue arrows. It says do 3 work searches per week, complete a resume after attending a resume writing class, participate in job training, and apply for 2 jobs per week. So that is what this client is going to have to do in order to maintain their TANF benefits. The second page of the IRP, this lists all the support services that they may be eligible for: car repair, clothing, counseling, personal hygiene, a bus pass, reimbursement for mileage. These are all support services that they might be eligible for. And then it's signed and dated at the end. And again, the client should get a copy in their primary language. So I've mentioned a few times WorkFirst support services, or I meant to if I skipped over that part. So basically what this is WorkFirst participants, they can get support services to help them comply with their IRP and find employment. And so that's what we mean by WorkFirst support services. This list here is not exhaustive, but I do have the second tip. It is a directory, a support services directory. So it goes into a lot more detail about what sorts of things a client can get help with, and also how much they can get towards that expense. Like how much will DSHS pay for a car repair? How much will they pay for clothing? All that information it's a really helpful directory there. And the goal of support services is to help the client participate in work and WorkFirst activities that lead to independence. So if there's something that you or your client thinks they need in order to be able to comply with IRP, they can ask for it, even if it's not one of these items listed here. Last year, there was additional money in the budget to provide housing and utility assistance as part of WorkFirst support services. So that's something that the clients can also ask for. And I'm not sure, as we're talking today, if there's still money in that budget or for how long that's going to last, but at least it was approved to June 30th, 2023. So there is some time, if that hasn't already been extended, to ask for some additional assistance like that. And these support services, they might be issued directly to the client, like a gas card. They might get a voucher that then they could take to the Department of Licensing, for example, or DSHS may pay a vendor directly. Like if a client needs a mental health assessment paid for, DSHS may pay the vendor directly. So how the support services are provided, it's a little different depending on what that support might be. So some tips, and then I think I do have a question, pause for question coming up. So these are kind of some of my tips for WorkFirst. The first is read that IRP thoroughly and make sure it's something that you or the client can actually follow. Again, advocates can attend these meetings and help the client advocate for a reasonable IRP for clients. If a client is unhoused, they don't necessarily have to engage in a job search if they're conducting activities identified on the IRP to help them with housing. So I'm going to go into more detail in a couple slides about what this means, but just so you all know, an IRP and WorkFirst, it might not necessarily mean a job search for everyone. If someone is unhoused and they need to first get that stability, that might be what it says in the IRP. Or if somebody has health problems, their IRP might say to, attend these appointments with their doctor or get a physical evaluation from their doctor. Or Penny actually mentioned earlier, if somebody is fleeing a domestic violence situation, their IRP, it might not say engage in a job search. It might say meet with domestic violence advocate once a month. Or again, if another example, if someone is unhoused, it might say get updated identification documents from the Department of Licensing, or work on getting copy of child's birth certificate to then be able to, all these kind of documentation that you need to be able to have a lease. So if your client is in a situation like that, if there are other things that they really need to focus on first, that can be part of the advocacy when doing the IRP. There are other reasons why a person would not have to engage in the job search first. I did include a link to the actual program rule for a full list, since we don't have time to go through everything today. And folks who are maybe not doing a job search, maybe they're doing something else first, they can still get those WorkFirst support services because they are still engaged in WorkFirst, even if it's not, doesn't look like it might look like for someone else. So tips continued, which I think I covered this maybe already on the first slide. Just a reminder, we have this new cause exemption for good cause for WorkFirst that is starting July 23rd, 2023. And then again, this just goes into more details, like if someone is unhoused or fleeing from a domestic violence situation or dealing with a medical condition, the goal of the IRP could be to conduct housing related activities or meet with domestic violence advocate at the YWCA once a month, obtain documents needed for housing. And as long as they're doing that, then they will still be eligible for TANF and not necessarily have to be thrown into the job search. Okay, I will pause there for questions and also to get a drink of water.
Well, I'm not seeing any questions coming in through the chat. So certainly folks are able to come off mute. And oh, we got Penny Marie, take it away.
Yes, thanks, Penny.
I forgot to say one more. If you're having, if you have to go get mental health help, like start seeing a counselor, that was the other thing that was on my IRP that I had, is that I had to start, like I had to establish care and continue to go, as well as like, because I didn't have to do the job searching part. So as well as like mental health and check in with my DV counselor, and if I needed to get help for my kids as well, like all of those things all were on my IRP. So it was very, very different. But I mean, like I said, it very, very much it helped a tremendous amount. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great, Penny. Thanks so much. Just having like the real life example that you're able to share, it's so helpful, and it's just a really good demonstration of how like TANF is supposed to support the family and the client, and it should be about what you needed and what your kids needed, not fitting you into some other box. So I really appreciate you sharing that.
Kim, go ahead, take it away.
Yes, I wanted to speak on the provider side that I work for Valley Cities Behavioral Health. And so just as she was saying, we do definitely support that. A lot of times I support by doing engagement letters, showing when the clients have come to services. I do those monthly. So I just put those clients at the end of the month, at the beginning of the month, and report for them. And I don't usually have a problem. I like doing it by fax and writing so that it's fully documented, because sometimes leaving voicemails people can be gone or absent or not get the voicemails. So I just prefer to do mine in writing and then fax it, and I make it an appointment. So and I've been doing this 17 years now, and I usually haven't seen a problem regarding advocating when a client has mental health services. And sometimes they don't know at first, and the client comes in and they're just kind of like, they're making me do all this stuff. I'm like, hold on, we're going to focus on your mental health. So all those other things, and quite often I'm working with folks that have the duality of homelessness too. So it's, you got to focus on take care of your kids, take care of your mental health, just kind of getting through some of these survival things before you can focus on trying to go get a job. So I usually haven't had any problem once I call, and I'm usually working with the Federal ACSO and the Kent CSO, and usually not very many challenges. So I appreciate that part of the work. And I rarely ever have had clients sanctioned, maybe only once or twice in about 17 years.
Thanks, Kim, for sharing. That's really helpful to hear it on the provider side. And just a good reminder that TANF is supposed to support the clients and what the client needs. So yeah, thanks so much for sharing.
Yeah, I have to say I'm loving the on the ground, provider personal experience being shared here. And it, you all are doing it, but I'm just going to validate. If you have questions, this is the time, but we also want to hear if you have tips, tricks that Hannah, can continue to share out, or, things that, again, have worked really well or haven't. And in that vein, I'm going to throw in a link to what we're calling our public benefits shop talk. This is, again, a series. We try to have like a focal topic, just so folks can, get a little bit of learning and sharing knowledge. We did our first one back in April, and we really focused on public benefits and varying immigration statuses. And Hannah was wonderful and joined us for that, as well as a provider from Mary's Place, and how they're navigating a lot of that. We don't have a topic identified for our July 27th. So again, if you want to fill out the feedback form and give us your thoughts, or throw it into the chat if that's easier, things that you would want to, what would bring you to that space. But again, we really try to have it be exactly what kind of Penny Marie and Kim are doing, is where you all can connect with each other, share, this is what has worked, this is what doesn't work. Hey, remember to do this, So I'm just going to put that plug in there. But Hannah, I think we'll go ahead and move on, because I'm not seeing any other hands or questions, but did just want to, plug the good work we're all doing together in community, and another place for us to come together. So I will hand it back to you.
Yeah. And I will also add, so I'm an attorney, so I usually see when things go wrong, when things are going swell, folks don't normally need an attorney. So yeah, it's great to hear when things are going well, because I normally am involved when something has gone wrong. So it's always good to hear, when clients are able to access these services and get the assistance they need. So I'm going to talk a little bit about sanctions. Kim actually mentioned this when she was talking. And so I just wanted to share a little bit about what a sanction is, what does it mean, how does it work, and some tips for avoiding sanctions or getting out of sanctions. So first, what is a sanction? It is a penalty or a punishment. It lowers the amount of the TANF grant that the family gets. DSHS can sanction you, you being the recipient, or stop your TANF altogether if you've failed or refused without a good reason to do everything in your individual responsibility plan, or to meet some other WorkFirst requirement. Your medical assistance will not change if you get a sanction, or even if your TANF closes. So the medical is something different. So sometimes what I've seen with my clients is the client doesn't even know that they're in a sanction status until their grant is reduced. So it might have happened because they've lost their phone number and they don't have that old phone number anymore, or they're having difficulty getting their mail, or they don't have a stable mailing address. So they've just missed notices or contact attempts from DSHS. And then all of a sudden their TANF grant is reduced, and it's because they're in sanction status. So that might be the first time a client even realizes they're in sanction. As soon as the client realizes that they're in a sanction status, either they get a letter saying they've been sanctioned or their benefits have been reduced, they should appeal. And we'll discuss how to do this later on. Even when the client appeals, which means they're telling DSHS, no, I disagree, I don't think I should be in sanction, they can still start working on fixing that sanction and getting out of that sanction. But if they had a good reason for missing that notice, or for not doing what they were required to do in their IRP, they might be able to get those benefits back that had been reduced if they appeal. So we'll talk more about what that means to appeal, but I just wanted to make a note. As soon as a client realizes they're in sanction, they can appeal that, start working on fixing the sanction, and then potentially maybe get some of those benefits back that had been reduced. So what the sanction process is first, I mentioned that your grant may be reduced or terminated. And so your grant it's reduced by either the greater of one person's share or 40%. whichever is more. And after you have not met your IRP requirements or WorkFirst requirements for 2 months, that's when the sanction process will begin. After you've been 12 months in a row in a sanction, DSHS will end or stop the TANF grant. So you're actually in sanction status for 2 months before they start reducing your grant. So it looks like either 12 months you've been in sanction or 10 months of having the grant reduction. So it's like 6 of one, half a dozen of another, but ultimately it's the same, that after you've been in sanction for a year, your benefits will be terminated. Now, DSHS will and should let you fix the sanction, or cure the sanction is a term that we use, so that you can get out of sanction status. So as soon as you know that you've been sanctioned or you're in sanction status, you can start working on fixing whatever the reason was. And DSHS does send letters and schedule meetings before sanctioning someone. So it doesn't just happen if you miss a meeting, all of a sudden you're in sanction. There's a whole process leading up to it. If your sanction, for example, was because you didn't follow that IRP, let's say you were supposed to apply for X amount of jobs and you didn't do it, to fix your sanction or to cure it, usually you have to follow your plan for 28 consecutive days. So you follow it for a month. If you were sanctioned because you didn't provide certain documentation, then as soon as you provide the documentation, you would have fixed or cured your sanction. So a little bit more just about the process. So first, DSHS sends a letter telling the client that they haven't been in compliance with their plan, or they haven't, filed the paper, provided the paperwork they were supposed to. So then DSHS will schedule what's called a case staffing meeting, and this is an opportunity to explain why there was there a good reason that the person didn't comply with their plan. At this point, DSHS is also required to screen for family violence and any other barriers and consider that in making the decision. Even if the client misses this case staffing meeting, because let's say the reason why they haven't been keeping up with their IRP or know what they're supposed to be doing is because their mailing address changed or they lost their housing. So even if the client doesn't show up for the case staffing meeting, it's still going to happen, and the worker is still supposed to look at these other barriers and consider that in making the decision. So if DSHS decides there was a good reason for not following the IRP, there's no sanction. If there wasn't a good reason, there is that sanction. They still send another letter at least 10 days before the sanction starts that explains why and how to fix it. And it's supposed to also include all the appeal rights. And all of these notices, they're supposed to be in the client's primary language. If they've selected a language other than English, if they've selected large print, the letters are supposed to be in the language and in a way that the client can understand. And then after that 10 days, that's when DSHS will lower the grant. So why, you may be asking, why are people sanctioned? What does it mean to, not have a good reason to do something? So it might look like, these are just some examples. If you were supposed to provide information that DSHS needed to make or update your IRP, if you were supposed to go to certain appointments listed in your IRP, counseling or doctor's appointments, and if you didn't do that, if you didn't show that you're doing the best to do everything in your IRP, and what I mean by that is if you didn't do what you're supposed to do in the IRP, and then if the client doesn't communicate a reason to DSHS, then that might be why they're sanctioned. DSHS doesn't know why the person's not complying. Or if you take a job or refuse to take a job that complies with labor laws and does not have unreasonable working conditions, hours, demands, or conditions. So what this might be like is you've gone through the job process and you were offered a job that is, it complies with labor laws, it's not unreasonable, and if you don't accept that job, that might be a reason why you're sanctioned. But I mentioned if someone has a good reason for not doing what they were required to do in the IRP, that is a way to avoid the sanction. So it might be that there was, a serious physical, mental, or emotional condition that interfered with someone's ability to follow the IRP. Maybe they were threatened with violence or had to flee a violent or unsafe situation. If DSHS didn't send notice telling the person what they're supposed to do, if they never got a copy of their IRP, then they have a good reason for not following it because they never got a copy. If someone can't find affordable or appropriate childcare for their child, within a reasonable distance, that might be a good reason that you weren't able to attend that resume writing class or accept that job. If your car breaks down, if your childcare doesn't show up and you don't have a chance to fix that in the meantime, if there was an immediate legal problem, like you're served with an eviction notice and that's what you need to focus on. Or, and this is something we'll definitely talk about in kind of how to avoid the benefit pitfalls, if you are or should have been receiving an equal access plan, which is kind of like a disability accommodation plan, but it's not necessarily just due to disability. So if you should have been receiving that extra support, but DSHS didn't properly screen you for that, or they failed to make or follow that accommodation plan, that might be a good reason. So just a quick example, I had this happen with a client. Their equal access plan required that they got all their documents in large print. Well, they didn't get their documents in large print. They were all just regular print. That's why they didn't, do what they were required to do in the IRP. And then that's how we were able to get this, stop the sanction process in its track, because they weren't provided the information in a way that they could understand it. So some tips to avoid the sanction status. The first, kind of the most immediate way that you can avoid the sanction is if either as soon as you're not going to be able to comply, or as soon as it happens, if the client contacts the DSHS worker, there's a phone number on their IRP, or if they go into the office or they speak to someone else on the customer service line, they should explain, exactly why they weren't able to comply as soon as they can, and then keep their own record that they made that call or that they went into the office. They can explain what happened, why it was beyond their control, and why that meant they weren't able to comply with their IRP. If you can't get a hold of your caseworker, which I'm sure that's a lot of people have experienced trying to get through to a DSHS worker. If you only get their voicemail, leave a really detailed voicemail and keep your own record of the date and time that you called. Or if you're a case manager and you're helping a client try to call DSHS and explain why they've missed something, if you help them make a call and then you can make a record of that, if you make a call and you can't get through and you're able to just fax in or send a letter, if you can keep a copy of that, that will help. If the client does end up going through the sanction process, if you can show, no, they made a good faith effort to try to let DSHS know, that can be a way to stop the sanction process. And DSHS does schedule meetings before they sanction someone. And I know I've mentioned this before, but advocates can absolutely attend these meetings, as long as the client is okay with it. One tip that I sometimes do that could be helpful when I'm starting to work with a new family that's on TANF, I will make sure that DSHS has updated phone numbers and mailing addresses, just so that the client doesn't miss any letters coming down their way. And then I'll also get a copy of that IRP and review it with the client and just, make sure it's still something that they can comply with. Because if it's something unreasonable or that they're not going to be able to follow, then they may end up getting sanctioned, when if we could have just requested an updated or a new IRP because something has changed, that's another way to kind of avoid that sanction. So hopefully that all made sense. There was this reset in July 2021. We're getting farther and farther away from 2021, so I might remove this from my slides going forward, but just there was a change in how sanctions were administered. So that's why if somebody was closed due to sanction before July 2021, and if they reapply, their case is going to open not in sanction status. there's a reset. If somebody's TANF was closed due to sanction after July 2021, and then they reapply, they are going to have to cure that sanction before they can get TANF again. So just a little, I don't know how many people this will affect at this point, but just wanted to at least flag that might be something that can help a client if they were closed and sanctioned years ago and want to reapply. Okay, I will pause to see if anyone has questions about sanctions or how to get out of them or how to avoid having them in the first place.
So I'm not seeing any questions, but there is a comment about leaving a time-stamped E-jazz note if you have access to the system. So I don't know if that is something you can speak to, Hannah, or if this person would want to throw a little more into the chat or talk a little bit about that, but it seems like a good tip if you all have access.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to it. I don't have access to eJazz. So if whoever wrote that chat or that note, if you're feeling comfortable coming off mute and just explaining a little bit more, maybe put it in the chat, I'd love to hear it from a provider. And that's okay. I can't see the chat, so I'm not sure.
eJazz is the system DSHS uses to document interactions with clients. So if you all have access to that, it sounds like a timestamp is a great way to sort of be able to be like, yeah, no, we actually did provide this. Here's the date and time we did. I think I'm interpreting that comment correctly, but again, encourage anybody that has other experiences or thoughts to either come off mute or throw something into the chat. Well, we've got some time because I'm, so, don't feel like you have to furiously be typing away. And I did have, Kayla, is that you coming off?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, can you hear me?
Yes.
I got my headphones. Okay. I was gonna say that I think a lot, if not most, social services providers have systems where they can and should be documenting, because so much of this stuff is like grant related and it's just best practice and blah, blah, blah. So if you're with a client who you're having to call and leave a voicemail over and over and over again, I think it's worth even that first attempt. I think, like for people who work for like Medicaid funded stuff, that might not count towards your Medicaid billing, but you can say, progress note, tried to call. And I'm not trying to shit on DSHS. I know that we're all doing our best, but there are some people you just can't seem to get a hold of. And I think that that's worth, documenting. And then also you can, if it's bad enough, file a report with DSHS, because it sucks, but there are only so many humans within the DSHS world that our folks have assigned to them at a given time. And it's like, it's really helpful to have that connection. And if you can't even utilize that connection, it's like, what am I doing? So I'm not trying to say be a snitch, but like, if you have to, it's worth saying something sometimes.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Kayla. And I come from the world of nursing where, you document everything. And I know that is a different, world sometimes, but it is really helpful. And I think if you have your own record that you can then, sort of official formal record you can supply to DSHS, I imagine that would only be helpful, although I will defer to Hannah, the lawyer, on that one.
No, absolutely. And again, I mentioned, people come to me when things have gone wrong. So, I do see clients that have been in sanction, and that's exactly what we try to do. We say, okay, well, did you call DSHS? Were you, sitting in your case manager's office? Can they maybe confirm that they called? Oh, they wrote this letter that they have this date and time, or they sent a fax and we have a copy so we can show that the client did try to do what they were supposed to do. So yeah, thanks, Kayla and Jody. I think those are great suggestions.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to take a minute to do a little clarifying. So I've dropped a couple links in. So our feedback survey link is really just an opportunity for you to tell us you're doing great, keep it up. You're doing great, and I want you to do this. Any suggestions you have for future trainings, for future shop talks, any, if you want to talk with us more on a one-on-one basis and give us some of your great experiences, like that's what the free feedback survey is for. I did throw in the registration link for our next shop talk, which is July 27th. We don't have a subject identified for that, and maybe we don't need one. I mean, these are really new forums. They're really meant to be for you all. And to meet your needs in a space where you can all come together, and we don't record them. So hopefully it encourages a little more dialogue that's not being captured and then put on YouTube for the world to check out. But if you have suggestions for things that you would want to talk about there, with your colleagues, or things to network or connect about, you can also either just throw that directly into the chat right now, into the feedback form, email us. So I just wanted to clarify that for folks. And then in that moment, we got another comment in the chat. So, would clients benefit from going to the actual DSHS office to get help if they're unable to get help for social worker they have been assigned to?
Yeah, so I recently saw some numbers, and I don't remember the exact, but the wait time is slightly less in the lobby than on the phone. So that might be a reason why, if someone's not able to get through to their worker on the phone, they can go in person. And if they do go in person, they might not speak to their exact caseworker, who may not be there, but they can speak to another available TANF caseworker. And even if there will be a record. Anytime somebody calls DSHS or goes in person, the worker that they talk to does make a note about that they came in and what was discussed. So if there is an issue with complying with the IRP or missing a notice, if they go in person, then that's absolutely a way that they can try to get help. If it's accessible for the client. Sometimes over the phone is more accessible, and other times going to the office is. But either way, they can get assistance in person or over the phone.
Thanks. And Kayla threw in her personal experience of having had more success physically going in when she's run into other obstacles, trying other routes. And Hannah, I think you're highlighting a really important point is obviously it's going to be pretty individualized to the person you're working with. And potentially your availability and capacity as well, because I think a lot of folks that we tend to work with can be more successful when they've got in-person support in some of those spaces. These are offices that are not set up to be warm and cozy and make us feel like humans. They're pretty institutional, and even if you have no trauma, that can be a hard space to deal with. And then you add on any trauma or mental health, it's an added layer to navigate. So, and then you're getting some thank yous, Hannah and Kayla, from the chat. So I am not seeing anything else coming through.
If it is okay, I will hop along.
Yeah.
Because I'm looking at the rest of my slides, and I do have this section. I do want to make sure we have time, but I don't want to miss anything. And then I also want to make sure we have time for questions and conversation at the end. So the next few slides I have, it is for other programs that are available to TANF families. So it's not just the cash assistance or help with job training or education. There are other programs available for TANF families, and one of those is the Working Connections Child Care Program. And this will actually help families pay for childcare The subsidy is paid directly to the provider. The provider could be an actual day care center, or it could be a family member, maybe who's providing the care. And the child who's receiving the care has to be a legal resident or a citizen. The parent doesn't. So if there's a, maybe an immigration status question or issue, as long as the child is eligible, then they can get that assistance. So there's two ways that people can get connected with the Working Connections Child Care program. One is if they are involved in WorkFirst and they are doing, what they're supposed to be doing for WorkFirst, their approved activity, which might be a job, or they're going to their education or job training. Another way is, this is for families that are not receiving TANF. If they are a working family and their income is at or below 60% of the state median income when they apply, or slightly higher when they're reapplying, they can apply for Working Connections childcare. So it's not just for TANF families, it could be for working families that are still low income. And the families pay a copay directly to the provider, and it is based on what their income is. So it might be $0 a month, it might be up to $215 a month, depending on the income, which it is still less than if they had to pay full price out of pocket. So just wanted to flag that program. There is also a diaper subsidy that is coming. This is starting November 1st, 2023. It's for families who have children under 3. They are automatically going to receive a $100 cash, like on top of the TANF they're already getting. They're going to get that one extra $100, and it's automatic, and it starts November 1st, 2023. So folks can start to expect that. There are also some emergency cash assistance programs for TANF families. One of the more common ones that maybe folks are already familiar with, it's called AREN, Additional Requirements for Emergent Needs. So this is if, if your family has been served an eviction notice, or maybe they own their home and there's been some kind of flooding, or their utilities are about to get turned off, and there's a good reason why, a tree fell on the house. Nobody could have anticipated that. Or you lost your job or the little income that you got, and so now you're facing an eviction notice. Families can apply for AREN, and the maximum benefit is $750 in a 12-month period. But there are some cases where families can receive more if related to health and or safety. So I had this example, I'm trying to look in my notes. If you have a parent or a child maybe who's on a ventilator or some other kind of assistive device, and they need to always have access to a phone to, or electricity in case something goes wrong, they may be able to get more than just that $750 in a 12-month period because they have this additional need. There's also diversion cash assistance, which this is for a short time need for families who are TANF eligible but don't want to receive TANF for one reason or another. So maybe a family would only be eligible for $50 on TANF, and they don't want to use up their 60 months, so they're not on TANF, but they have this short need, this short-term need. So the maximum benefit there is $1,250. There's this other program called SEAP, Consolidated Emergency Assistance Program. So this is emergency funds available to families who would be eligible for TANF, but for some reason are not receiving TANF. So this could be maybe their TANF, they're in sanction status, so their TANF has been terminated. Maybe the family, like the parent, doesn't have the immigration required status to be able to get TANF, but they would be TANF eligible otherwise. They can apply. And I recently helped a client apply for this, and DSHS will pay the specific needs. So they don't get the full TANF grant, but they will pay, the rent if they're facing eviction, or if they have a utility bill, DSHS will pay, or they give the money directly to the parent on the EBT card, who can then they could pay that bill. So those are just some extra kind of emergency programs that are tied to TANF that I wanted to make sure people are aware of. Another question or issue that we see a lot is, well, once somebody's actually on TANF or food or any other state benefit, what do they have to report to DSHS? And the reason why I wanted to talk about this, if somebody doesn't report something that they were supposed to, they might end up getting, like, maybe their benefits are going to be reduced, terminated, or they might be assessed an overpayment. So the award letter that somebody gets, that will clearly state what needs to be reported between reviews and how to report it. So if you have to report when your income goes over a certain dollar amount, that's going to be right there on the letter. So another good reason to, maybe you can keep copies of your clients' letters if they are, aren't able to hang on to those documents. Just some examples of things that you usually have to report for TANF. If you move, or if somebody moves in or out of your home, including the child or children that's on the TANF assistance unit, if your gross income goes above the payment standard, so basically if your income increases and it might put you over the income limit, you're going to want to report that so that you don't end up getting overpaid benefits. If your resources increase, that's something that you might need to report. And if you have a change in employment, or maybe you were in an educational program as part of your WorkFirst and you graduated, or you switched to a different program, that's something that you'd want to report. And you could report by calling DSHS. This is the customer service number. You could report in writing, send a letter or a fax. You could go in person and report. We've already kind of alluded to this, but I think it's a good idea to keep a record of your own reporting so that if down the road there's some kind of issue with the benefit, you can prove, nope, I called on this date and I reported it. If you go in person, like let's say you're providing a copy of a new pay stub or something like that, you can make a copy and ask DSHS to date stamp your copy. So you can leave with the date stamp, or, you fax it in and you have the fax confirmation. When do you have to report things to DSHS? This is also another issue I wanted to flag, because if somebody reports, but they report a little bit too late, they might still end up getting maybe overpaid and then have to pay those benefits back. So generally, you have to report changes by the 10th day of the month following the month that the change happened, which sounds like a really confusing sentence, but just as an example, if you move, or let's say that maybe a child moves in and out of your home on September 1st, you'd have to report that by October 10th. So it's the 10th day of the month following when the change happened. For income, it's the date that you actually receive income. So let's say you start a new job on September 1st. Well, that's not a good example. Let's say you start a job on September 30th, but you don't actually get paid until like October 5th. That's the date. October 5th is the date that you've actually gotten the income. So you would have to report that new income by November 10th. So the date that you get the income, not when you start the job, that's when you'd have to report it. For families on TANF, if the child in the assistance unit will be gone from the home for longer than 180 days, then you have to report that within 5 days of when you know the child's going to be gone for that extended period. If the child is gone temporarily, so less than 180 days, the parent can still receive that TANF grant, and they have to report that change. They have to report when the child's going to be gone for longer than 180 days. I won't get into the specifics, but if anyone has questions, there is a situation where maybe a child is living with mom and then goes to live with a grandparent, but is planning on returning to live with mom. There are some situations where both mom and grandparent can receive TANF on behalf of that child. So it has to do with whether the child's been removed from the home by the state, or if the child, if child welfare is not involved. So if you think your client might be, there are some questions about this would be a good question for Ask a Lawyer, and then we can go into more detail and kind of talk about the specifics. But just wanted to flag that is, when the child moves in and out of the home, that might be something that has to be reported. And then I'm going to jump into kind of my how to avoid benefit pitfalls part of the presentation. I have a couple slides here. So I mentioned I'm an attorney, so I'm usually involved when something has gone wrong. So we have these tips to try to help prevent things from going wrong. And one of the first one is to report those required changes in things like income, household size, resources by the deadlines. What we see sometimes happen is if somebody didn't report a change or they reported it too late, they may get an overpayment, which is when the department DSHS says, oh, we paid you too much in benefits, you weren't eligible, you need to pay it back. If you're not sure if something needs to be reported, I'm sorry, my Siri on my phone keeps, I think, thinking that I'm talking to it, so it keeps talking back. Sorry about that. If you're not sure about what you need to report, or if you have a change and you're not sure if it's something that needs to be reported, you can absolutely contact DSHS and ask for that information. There's information usually on the website, it's on the letter, or you can reach out to us and we can give some advice about that. Another way to avoid benefit pitfalls is to comply with the program requirements, or tell or report to DSHS as soon as you know you can't or you're not able to comply. And we've already kind of talked about this in detail earlier on, but just wanted to flag that as a way to avoid a benefit pitfall. And honestly, that's easier said than done. Jody already kind of alluded to even going into the DSHS office, working with someone, on the other side of a desk, that can be really intimidating. There could be a lack of trust. So, it could be difficult for clients to comply with those requirements or advocate for changes in what those requirements might be, which might be a really good place for that advocate to step in and support the client with that. Another way to avoid benefit issues, I mentioned this briefly, is to request an equal access plan. It's also called, a necessary supplemental accommodations. And so what this is that DSHS must provide these additional accommodations to any person who has a mental, neurological, physical, or sensory impairment or other limitation that prevents them from accessing or maintaining benefits in the same way that an unimpaired person would. So I wouldn't normally just read the slide word for word or kind of copy and paste from the rule language in my PowerPoint slides, but I wanted to specifically do it for equal access plans so that you as a provider, you can just copy this language and say, look, this is what DSHS is supposed to do. This is what my client needs. They need an equal access plan. An equal access plan could look like additional time to fill out paperwork. It could look like having letters in large print, having phone calls if somebody misses an appointment, or having a phone call in addition to an in-person appointment. It could mean that the person gets help from a DSHS worker to get additional paperwork that they need to provide. It could look like the client gets a private room when they go into DSHS to be able to meet with their worker instead of having to stand kind of at that open kiosk or desk, the bank teller type desk that you normally get at DSHS. So, it could look like what it needs to support your client. DSHS is supposed to screen when somebody first applies for benefits. They're supposed to screen someone if they need an equal access plan. Sometimes they'll ask the client, or they may not, or they may ask the client, do you need any extra help? But the client isn't sure what that could look like. So when I start working with the client, I always check, do they have an equal access plan? Do they need one? And would this issue have been avoided if they had an equal access plan? So just wanted to flag that for everybody. And then lastly, the client can designate an authorized representative, which is someone who can talk to DSHS and represent the client on behalf of the client to DSHS when they apply or receive benefits. And this doesn't have to be a lawyer, it doesn't have to be a case manager, it can be a friend, it can be a family member. It's just somebody who can report things to DSHS or who can get information from DSHS on behalf of the client. It could be organizations as well. So you as a case manager could be the client's authorized representative. And there's also a way to do a kind of a limited version of an authorized representative where you just get copies of their DSHS notices. So we do this sometimes for our clients that maybe are chronically unhoused or just have challenges getting or understanding their mail, we get a copy of their notices so we know if they're due for a review, so that the client doesn't miss the review, because we've gotten a copy of the letter, we've reached out, we found the client and helped them do the review. So that might be one of the most helpful ways to avoid benefit pitfalls if you have clients that are just, they're constantly getting their benefits terminated or reduced because they're missing notices or not able to understand the notices that they get from the state. And let's say you've done everything we've talked about, but something, still goes wrong. Someone's benefits are denied, reduced, sanctioned, terminated, they get an overpayment, what can you do in this situation? Well, you can appeal, or I should say the client can appeal this decision. And basically an appeal it's telling DSHS, I disagree. I don't think I should have been reduced, terminated, or sanctioned. To appeal, the method for appealing is that you request a hearing, an administrative hearing. How do you request an administrative hearing? You could call DSHS, you could send in a letter. There is a form, a hearing request form, but you don't have to fill out, there's not a special form. Or you could also call the Office of Administrative Hearings directly and request the hearing that way. You have the right to be represented by an attorney. You don't need one, but you have the right, or you also have the right to have somebody else with you. So you could have a case manager with you at the hearing. I included the phone number for DSHS customer service and also the Office of Hearing Administration. And I also want to say there's no magic word to appeal or request a hearing. If a client doesn't actually say, I formally am requesting an administrative law judge hearing, they don't have to say that. They just have to express some kind of disagreement with the decision that DSHS made. And the DSHS worker is supposed to understand that that's a hearing request and process it. That may not always happen. So if you are able to provide any, like a copy, if you're helping the client request a hearing, and again, you can make a note that you called, or if you fax something in, just keep a record showing that the client did appeal. And what happens at these hearings, it's an administrative law judge. So it's somebody who doesn't work for DSHS or DCYF or Healthcare Authority. It's an independent person who's going to review all the notes and determine whether DSHS did something wrong or if they didn't do anything wrong. We represent clients at hearings all the time. So if you think your client needs a hearing, or maybe they're already at the hearing stage and they need some assistance, that would be a good referral for our program. And there are some deadlines to request a hearing. Generally, you have 90 days to request a hearing from the adverse action, so the date of the denial or their termination. If they miss that 90 days, there are some good cause reasons why someone might be able to still get a hearing, but it's always best to try to request a hearing sooner rather than later. If somebody's benefits are going to be terminated or reduced, they can actually request continuing benefits to be able to keep getting the benefits while they're waiting for the hearing. So that's something that you do have to ask for that within 10 days of the date of the denial notice. So you have to ask for that quickly, more quickly. If you have any questions about continuing benefits, happy to answer those. Oh, and actually, that brings me to my last slide, referrals to benefits legal assistance program. Usually I give more of an introduction at the beginning, but I just was so excited to dive in. I blew through it, but we are the benefits legal assistance program. I'm the program manager and one of the attorneys. We represent clients, low-income clients, individuals and families in King County who have a problem with their public benefits. So it's free. We don't charge clients for our services. We represent clients at hearings, but we also can do advice and counsel, kind of limited help, whatever the client needs. We have an intake phone number, so you can call that, the client can call that. We have an email address. Again, clients or case managers can email directly. If you are working with a client and you're not sure if it's a referral for us or not, you can email me directly. I'm Hannah Rosenberger. My email is right there in the middle. I'll also put in the chat. You can reach out to us directly. You could also send a lawyer to the Ask a Lawyer send an email to the Ask a Lawyer email address, which is, it's our general email. So you can email us that way. And that concludes the presentation. So I'll keep this slide up while we see if there are any questions.
Awesome. Hannah, you are amazing. Woo!
You're too kind.
We've got 2 comments in the chat. I'm going to start with the second one because I think it's a little bit more directly related to sort of where we were talking. And this is Shannon, pardon me, having some beautiful thoughts that they are sharing with us. So just around building a trauma-informed compliance sanction model. And they are saying if compliance matters, then it would be important to take time to explain and describe the compliance model, to discuss examples of what non-compliance looks like, what compliance looks like, be clear when to expect a sanction, why they're implemented, how to repair them. Moving more towards like sanctions, not simply punishment, they should be life consequential interventions and a way to revisit the individual responsibility plan. Did I get that right? Okay. IRP, highlight unmet needs, recalibrate action from all parties involved. They should be timely and rational and subject to appeal and quick repair. And then Shannon also just said, if clients have criminal justice involvement, language like compliance and sanction includes a lot of baggage. And I just felt like there was a ton of really good thought thinking in Shannon's comment that aligned with a lot of how you approach this work, Hannah, in terms of like, we know the system is not trauma informed and it's bulky and it's a huge bureaucracy. And so I think Shannon is pairing nicely with some ways with which, unfortunately, we as advocates or case managers can kind of step in and do some of the things that they are talking about, and not, not because we can't always rely on the system or a particular individual within that larger system to do that. So wanted to highlight that and just give space for other thoughts, comments, follow-up questions. You're welcome, Shannon. It was a beautiful thought. It needed to be shared out loud and captured in the recording. And then Kim also threw in around the AREN assistance, that a possible point for future advocacy is paying for storage for families experiencing homelessness. And Kim had a client that really struggled with this, and that storage wasn't approved under AREN. I don't know if you have any thoughts around that, Hannah, and I'm going to look at the new comments coming in.
Oh, it's a great point. I love that that's an advocacy, like an idea for future advocacy. I wonder if I think about, because again, I go into the lawyer brain like, well, if I took that case to hearing, I think I could probably convince a judge that it is a, emergent need and would prevent them from losing their possessions and derail their stability. So yeah, I think just agree with Kim. That's a good point for future advocacy. And, if anyone is helping a client apply for AREN and it does get denied, or maybe only partially approved, if they're in King County and you want to connect them with us, that might be something that we can do some more advocacy on, just individually, like help the client appeal that, or work with the case manager and try to help get something like that approved. But yeah, I don't know if we would be successful or not. And sure, Kim, that client had your support as well, but definitely a great point for the, those emergency programs are there, but there are still barriers. And I just thought, I had one thought that I'll just share. A client I recently helped apply for that SEEP, the Consolidated Emergency, I can't even remember what it's called. It's the third one on the list. The worker we talked to, she told us that she'd been a worker for something like 10 years, and this was only the second time she'd helped someone even get that assistance. So I just thought, okay, so it's there, it's available for people, but either people don't know about it or it's not something that is being widely shared, which is why I wanted to make sure people knew that these emergency assistance programs are there. Because I don't know how often they're being used or approved, like in the situation you shared, Kim. So yeah, thanks for sharing.
Yeah. And always just another plug to, to reach out to Hannah and her team, because they're an incredible resource, and maybe can help think through, even if they may not have the exact problem or answer to the problem. We have another question coming in, and this is sort of to the full community. Does anyone know of any birth certificate payment assistance? I have a client that needs to request birth certificates for her kids, and she does not have enough income. Any suggestion is welcome. So that is Juan asking that question. So if anybody has resources for Juan, throw them in the chat, come off mute.
Hi. I'm not quite sure whether this would be counted as, I don't know, it's all complicated. You said any suggestion is welcome. So the suggestion I have is, if your client is connected anywhere where they have what's it called, like crisis diversion funding, which is kind of a weird thing, like you don't know about it until you know about it type of thing, as most things are in social work, it feels like at DESC, for example, it depended on the situation, but I feel like you could advocate, or someone at DESC could advocate for assistance with this type of thing if it meant continued stability or an increase in stability. So it's sort of like asking contacts you have at other agencies, if your agency doesn't have that kind of funding that you're aware of, hey, do you guys have this? It's not perfect, but it's the first thing that came to mind.
Thanks, Kayla.
I would also add, if this is a TANF family and the birth certificate is, related, or you could make the argument it's related for them to be able to do whatever their WorkFirst requirements are. Like if their requirement, if their focus is getting stable housing and they need, I've seen that be paid for through the WorkFirst support services to, like they'll get a voucher for a license, or if there's like a court fee they need to be able to make the clerk to get a copy of the birth certificate. I have seen that be paid for through work support services. So if they're a TANF family, that might be an option for them.
Wonderful. Well, that brings us right to time, folks. So Hannah, thank you so much for being here. Thank you, everybody, for taking time out of your very busy days to join us, to share your thoughts, your questions, your experiences. We love having you all here. And we will have this on our YouTube channel shortly, follow-up blog with video resources, all that jazz, and have a lovely, wonderful rest of your day.